What's up, y'all? It is the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. I'm Joey Powell. We're happy that you're with us if you're joining us live on Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, a little earlier than the 8 we've been doing. But, hey, we got to play with the schedules will allow us to do. Sherrell, McMillan, and Sean Moran are with me as always. Listen, we have a 2-week win to talk about, so let's get right to it. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Fellas, North Carolina goes 2-2 and actually stacks their third straight conference win after beating SMU this week in Chapel Hill in a game that, for the most part, except for like the last 4 to 8 minutes, looked really, really good. And then went on a road trip to NC State. I was lucky enough to do the post-game with Bobby Fraser. Shout out to Big Shot Bob for stepping in yesterday on short notice and helping us do the post-game. But as we talked about in the post-game yesterday, that first half may have set basketball back a good 15, 20 years, but regardless of the way it looked, North Carolina was able to win 63-61 in a rough environment at NC State. Fellas, I guess the first things first, what do you feel like, and I'm going to take the 2 wins off the table. First things first, Sean, what was the most important thing that you saw this week from this team?
Taking the 2 wins off the table, I do think defensively, we talked about, well, for the past few weeks, what is their connectivity? And last week started to see it get a little bit better, especially in that Notre Dame second half. I know NC State was shooting the lights out, and I think if that game had gone any longer, I think we might have been looking at a different score. But I also think part of that was them getting to the line a few times and getting comfortable and confident. But besides for that, in the first half and then going to the SMU game, I thought defensively they played probably up to their potential. You had everybody, I think, locked in, not switching as much when the switches were happening. They were communicating to everybody. Everybody was working hard, had their head turning on a swivel, so to speak, and understood what they were supposed to do. So I do think defensively, and if you just look at the stats in terms of the favorite points per possession, probably the best week they've had all year, keeping both teams under under 0.9, I think, for the most part. So I'd say defensively, once again, I don't think this team is a defensive juggernaut. I know the early conference-only stats show them, not to take Sherrell's talking points, but they do show that early on. But I do think in general they're playing more together, and they're working hard, and the mental lapses are fewer and far between. So to me, that's probably the biggest takeaway from the week.
Yeah, I think great point about the switching less. I also mentioned it to Bobby yesterday that I felt like during this game the team was going to need really just to show some poise for a possession or two at the end. And really, that's what ended up winning the game for them. I think all the stuff you just called out is really accurate because you've seen more connectivity, you saw more discussion. There's definitely still some issues with the defense. I mean, I felt like they defended well against NC State on the perimeter, but everything past that, NC State finished the game on 5 out of 6 from the field and still lost, and they were getting what felt like layups. But North Carolina was defending the perimeter better. I like that you called that out, Sean. Sherrell, I'm going to ask you the same thing. What do you feel like, if there's anything that Sean left on the bone, what do you feel like was the most important thing that North Carolina accomplished this week besides winning 2 games?
I think it's what you mentioned about closing time against NC State, because there was going to be – I think everybody's seen the graphic where it's got North Carolina in the lead at the under 4 timeout against Michigan State, against Kansas, against Florida. And there was one more, I think, and they lost all those games. So the fact that they lost the lead, they were up by 9. I think it was, 56-47 after Ian Jackson hit a 3?
They were
so
up,
they lost,
9 just under 6 minutes.
Yeah, so it was a little troubling that, again, a decent-sized lead vanished in essentially no time. But they did make the plays down the stretch, and I think Brian Ives tweeted it out that UNC's 5-2 in one-possession games so far this year, which is a marked improvement from what they've been before. Now, there's kind of an asterisk in there. Like, there's some games of those that shouldn't be one-possession games against teams that they're clearly more talented than. But they are kind of finding a way to win in the clutch. And I think we say that every year, almost as a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism when they start to win close games. But I do think it is a skill set that can be flexed, that you can learn how to close. And the hope is, because they're going to be in a lot of close games, presumably the rest of the year, that they can take these learnings from how they lost the Kansas game and how they lost, the Florida game, how they won the Dayton game, how they won the UCLA game, and use all that to come through in the clutch. So for me, that's the biggest non-defense takeaway, is that they were able to find a way to beat State in a really, really hostile environment.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I think on that point, probably still not super confident when it does get to crunch time, but they have over the last 2 weeks proven it out. But when you look at both Notre Dame as well as NC State in terms of what Elliot Cadeau did, I think both plays had broken down. So the first or second options weren't there, but Notre Dame, he hits the big three, follows that up with the free throw, and NC State, he makes that extremely nice pass to Jalen Washington, who made himself available. So, he had also just come back in. He had been taken out after those 2 turnovers. I think he had 8 assists and 1 turnover leading up to 2 really important turnovers. But for him to come back in when it mattered and have that pass off of what could have been a very poor possession, I think also speaks volumes to him continuing to improve and his maturity that he's gaining.
I thought, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I don't want to say it's his best game, but it was really good to see him, for the most part, be complete. And 2 of the turnovers that you mentioned, Sean, they weren't really on him. There were probably fouls that should have been called on those possessions that ended up with turnovers.
One, his arm was raked down, which I don't know how that's not called, but go ahead.
And then the other one, Jalen Washington kind of got ridden out of bounds. So those were 2 of the turnovers. And they officially credited him in the end with 11. So he ended up with 4 points, 11 assists, and I think 3 turnovers total. So just the fact that he's getting back to kind of making the simple play. There wasn't a time, I think, the entire game against State where you looked at him and said, why'd you make that pass? Like, that you didn't need to do that. You could have had a bounce pass, or you could have, just tried something easier. You could have hit a double instead of trying to get a home run. I don't think he tried to do that at all against State, and you kind of saw it reflected. I mean, some of the passes to Ian, like, he was finding him across court, skip passes, to pass to Washington, obviously, just really showing off his vision. And he's got to realize he doesn't have to score 10 points a game. I think at the beginning of the year, maybe he thought he needed to, but UNC's at its best when he's distributing. And when he distributed like he did yesterday, Ian Jackson got wide open looks. RJ Davis got a couple open looks, even though they're still not falling with the regularity he would like. And then Jalen Washington got a few too. They're really working on that pick and roll in the slip for the big. They're really working that hard, and I think they're setting it up so that eventually you're going to have Jackson on one side, like he's been, and then Powell on the other, and teams are going to not want to help off of that, and the bigs are going to start getting more layups. So all that to say, it was good to see Cadeau kind of play like we know he's capable of.
So I want to stay there for a second. I had actually put this in my pre-show notes. One of the things that I really I got some curiosity about was that they spammed a lot of that action yesterday out of what looked like horns, but running running high ball screen, then trying to get the ball to one of the post players, either on a dive or just a hard roll. And it seemed to be some issues with passing and catching, right? I'm not trying to dumb this down, but really it seemed to be that simple. And I don't know if it's just because they haven't run that a lot, but I saw that with mine own eyes, and I'm just sitting there thinking, like, man, I feel like that can be cleaned up just with repping it, especially if they're going to spam it this much in the game. Sherrell, do you feel like that's something that can be fixed? Do you feel like it's just who this team is in the sense that, nobody's going to have Sean May hands, right? But I did see some potential there in the sense of what the play calling wasn't matching up where the execution was, and it seemed just as simple as guys just not hanging on to the ball.
Yeah, that's one of those you can't really put on the coaches. The coaching staff has had his issues, I think we can all agree, this season, but for the most part, guys were in position to make plays, and they either couldn't make them or got fouled trying to make them, and that's okay. What I liked, though, was that, Joey, how many times have we talked about it over the last 3 or 4 weeks? You've said, but they've got to get the bigs involved somehow. They've got to get them the ball. They got to make them a threat because UNC's too one-dimensional with the high ball screen, and then letting RJ or Ian or whomever do their thing. Well, it might have been almost too much overcorrection because the bigs were getting touches almost every possession, it felt like. I was talking to someone offline, and they were like, so the game plan is to let Jalen Washington and Finn Allen Lubin beat NC State? And I said, I don't know. Maybe that's they saw something in film, or that's what the defense was giving them. I'm not sure, but I liked that they established it, and now you can start to do more things off of it because it's on tape. And hopefully, the thing that will come off of the most is the Jalen Washington, mid-range pull-up jumper.
I may have yelped a little too loud when he actually took and then made the 8-foot baseline jumper yesterday against NC State. Again, not because he made the basket, but just because I feel like that's just important. And I know the folks that are listening to the show, you've heard me say it the last 3 times. I just feel like it's just so instrumental in this offense getting what they need and the ability to spread the floor more so that the creators can create. Sean, something that I think you probably enjoyed a little bit yesterday was seeing how much Drake Powell's versatility showed. And again, I'm thinking about not just getting to the basket, not just hitting 3-pointers, but just I feel like he's everywhere. And if there's ever been a guy that is, he almost has this kind of Blubber feel to him, right? Remember that old movie Blubber, where or Flubber, I'm sorry, where he's like everywhere, and he's no dimensions, but he's all dimensions at one time. And I know I'm making a word salad here, but I'm dead serious. Like his ability to affect the game in different ways, I don't think can be quantified now. What have you seen out of Drake Powell's game that you feel like is the biggest advantage for North Carolina, or is the fact that it's not one thing?
I think the last point that is not just one thing from him, and it's a shame that it might only be 1 year in a Chapel Hill uniform, just because I think you are starting to see him grow and get more confident each and every game, which is always fun too. But on the offensive end, 17 points, and last week we said, hey, you probably don't want Drake shooting 6 threes, and then he goes out and hits 4 of 6 against SMU, and then wasn't quite 8 points against NC State, but I think from an offensive end that he's proven he's confident, and when he does get his feet and in rhythm from a three-point perspective, that you have to guard him, and then as well as being more active on those cuts, getting into transition. There are several times, and I thought UNC did a better job in transition from a passing perspective, and there are several times he was running the floor, didn't get it, but I think once again he's out there, has that speed and versatility, and then flip side on the defensive end, talked about this a little bit coming out of Maui. His overall defensive rating was really poor, just on a points per possession basis. Now, you could look at that rating in a lot of different ways, but one thing you did notice was that he was getting beat off the dribble. He was playing a little bit too high, but now I think you see him with that wingspan, with that versatility. He's able to use that in a variety of different ways, and I know strength will always be an issue for a freshman, and you saw Styles get him a little off balance towards the end. But once again, I think having him at that 4 spot, being able to switch, rebound, contest, etc., has been great for UNC and gives them that size that they need, especially given the strength of their guard. So great week for Powell overall, and I think one that is continuing to see him improve. And I think offensively coming into the season, his shooting was probably the biggest question, and I think he's continued to show, hey, I can be a consistent three-point threat here, and I think that's going to be the biggest thing going forward for them.
A good thing, I think, also, in addition to what you just laid out, Sean, I haven't seen Drake Powell take a shot that I feel like has been a bad shot recently, and you usually can't say that about most freshmen just because they're still finding their way, right? So I think that's also a nice piece of growth. Go ahead.
And I think you can say that about both freshmen, which I know we'll get into Ian later. But I think when you look at both of their ratings, they're 2 of the top, two of the highest on the team. And defensively, I think they're starting to understand the schemes and where they're supposed to be, both a little bit more. So their play is just continuing to elevate the team in general.
Yeah, agree wholeheartedly. Sherrell, I think one of the things that we've become accustomed to with North Carolina basketball, and this is jump staffs, is that the rotation tightens after you start getting around MLK weekend. Well, here we sit January the 12th, and North Carolina had, I think they played 8 guys against North Carolina State. And you saw what I think was a second straight DMP coach's decision on Cade Tyson. Jalen Withers did not play in the second half. You did not see Ty Claude or James Brown against NC State, I don't think. Maybe James Brown had a couple of minutes. But do you feel like that we're starting to see that from Hubert Davis? Or do you think this was probably just him going by the feel? Because he's always said he's a big feel coach. Do you think this is more of a longer strategy, or was this just him feeling the way the games were this week?
Yeah, you never want to say it out loud that that's the strategy because you want those guys ready just in case their number is called. But it seems pretty obvious. I mean, if there was a time for Cade Tyson to play, giving his reputation and what he has been good at throughout his career, it was against SMU on Tuesday night when they were in the zone, and UNC they weren't struggling, but Drake Powell, was that the game he hit 4 threes or he hit 4 threes, yeah. So it's like if you have Drake Powell in front of you who does, I'm not trying to be mean here, but he does everything better as a player, except that coming into the season, and now he's doing that better. Then it's kind of like, why do you need to play Tyson outside of injury? So I think you are seeing the rotation tighten. The same thing with Withers. I think a decision's been made that they tried those two as kind of the starting four or the pair of fours, and they gave it almost half the season, and they realized that it's not working with those two, and that Drake Powell, even though he's slighter than both of them, I think he's a little bit shorter than Tyson. His athleticism, his length allows him to do things that they can't do. He's a better defender, and frankly, he's a better shooter this year than both of them too. So I think that's why you're seeing those two not play. And then they've made a decision to go with Jalen and Van Allen Lubin kind of in the post, and then go with the rest of your best players. We know that pretty much the five best players on the team are guard/wings, and then you got the two centers essentially. So it makes sense, and I think that's kind of what it's going to be moving forward. Again, unless there's foul trouble or injury or just a certain situation where you put in Tyson as a shooting specialist or Withers as a defensive specialist. But I think that's where things are moving, and it makes a lot of sense because you have to have Drake Powell, you have to have Ian Jackson, and you have to have R.J. Davis on the floor.
You can't
pretty
keep them
much
off the floor.
35 minutes, 36 minutes, 37 minutes a game, and then you fill in from there. With Trimble back, it'll give Cadeau an opportunity to rest, and then you got Lubin and you've got Washington kind of going back and forth depending on who's playing well that night.
Sean, we talked about, earlier this season once we realized that North Carolina did not have that marquee guy in the post, and we talked about how they were going to replace, how are they going to find a way to replace Armando Bacot. I'm starting to see situations where, especially this week, Jalen Washington and Van Allen Lubin have both combined to make it work. You saw Jalen Washington come back with a double-double yesterday. He's become quite the rim protector in the last 2 weeks. I also think that even though there were some folks kind of ripping Van Allen Lubin yesterday during the game, and he did have some issues catching the ball and missed a couple of chippies, he still had 9 rebounds. And so you're seeing that production from a mix of guys. In this case, it's been Washington and Lubin. Sean, do you think that Washington's development over the last couple of games is just because he's getting more minutes? Do you think he's getting more comfortable and more acclimated because he's getting more PT? Is it that simple?
I think partly is that he is getting a little more comfortable. I think there are a lot of rebounds to go around yesterday in that game to have the high rebound numbers for the bigs, especially given the offensive rebounds that were given up. I think part of it is the competition. The 3 wins, probably not tournament teams that UNC is going up against. Especially NC State's bigs. But at the same time, I think for Washington, confidence is a set that you have to, for most players. But I think him probably a little more than most that you want to build. And I think from an offensive end, him getting the ball a little, and every time I see it, I think of you, Joey, because you've been pushing this for so long. And once again, you don't want to see him over dribble like he did at the beginning of the game where he took 3 dribbles and turned it over. But that 1-2 dribbles and you either have a layup dunk or a kick out. And then defensively, over 10 blocks in the last 3 games. I think from a strength perspective, that's always going to be an issue. But I think you do see that confidence, having the dunk, having the block. And even from a shooting perspective, I know I know Hubert Davis didn't mind the 3 at that time. I'm sure a lot of fans were probably questioning it when it happened. Once again, want him to take as many mid-range 8 to 10 foot face-ups as he can, just given I think that's one of the best shots in basketball. But you look at his free throws, and I think the first one he missed you could tell maybe he was a little, not fully there mentally. And then his other makes pretty much perfect swishes. So, he does have that shooting ability. If he can extend it to three, that would be fantastic. I'm not counting on it, but I think both offensively and defensively, he has grown from a confidence perspective. And I think Van Allen Lubin, you know what you're going to get. You know where the ceiling is, you know where the floor is. So if he can continue to rebound, be solid, ideally limit those turnovers, you just want to get the maximum effort you can from the bigs. And I think if they can do that, once again, that minimizes the floor for this team.
Sherrell, you followed Jalen Washington's recruitment and his career at North Carolina very closely. Is what he's done the last few games, independent of strength of competition, is this what North Carolina can expect out of him, or you just still need to see a couple more instances of show me?
Yeah, I'm trying to be delicate. Yeah, there's still a little bit of show me, but also this is kind of where he's at, and he's not going to be Armando Bacot. Like, I think it's just hard for people to accept that because UNC has had what it's had in the post for so long, but that's not who he is. Like, he's not. I'll be surprised if he has another 12 rebound game this season. If he does, that's good for UNC, or it could mean they're missing a ton of shots and they're playing really good defense. So I guess either way, it's good for UNC, but that's just not, the things that he's best at. The things that he's best at are things that he hasn't shown a ton this year, which we've talked about, which is the face-up jumper, the pick and pop, that kind of stuff. Blocking shots is something that I think has the skill set for. He just hasn't done. I don't know why before now it hadn't happened, but that was one of the things you looked at because he has I think a 7'2" wingspan, something like that. He's pretty long, and we always said when we were kind of projecting, it was like, well, he should give you some rim protection if he's able to stay in front of the person with the ball, and able to stay in front of whoever it is on offense. So I think you're seeing not his ceiling, but I think you're seeing kind of a facsimile, if you will, of what he could look like. There probably would be a few more jumpers per game, probably not as many rebounds. I think finishing, he's done a decent job at, and then a couple blocks. So for me, it's mid-range jump shots, block shots, and then you take whatever you can get from him from a rebounding perspective.
I mean, wouldn't you love, instead of 5 seconds left on the shot clock and somebody's dribbling 30 feet out, that you go to him a little bit more in maybe some of those later situations, because if he catches the ball, he can turn and face and he can get the shot off. And it's just such an underutilized weapon over really the last 2 years.
Yeah, agreed. And he's just got to get the opportunity to take it. And I'm not in the rooms when they're doing the scout. I don't know if it's like, hey, we're not thinking about that right now. The priority is Ian, RJ, Seth, and the guards, or if it's a situation where they're like, Jalen, shoot the shot. We want you to shoot it, and he's just not doing it. Which again goes back to what Sean said and Joey said about confidence. So maybe moving forward, he'll have a little more confidence after a game like that to take that shot, because I maybe remember him taking it twice this season before that. But last year it was kind of that was where he made his money at.
I went back and watched a play towards the end of the game where North Carolina was actually behind. Washington actually got the ball at the top of the key, and he probably could have taken a power dribble and gone up. He could have pulled for the jump shot. But instead, Middlebrooks was probably within a step of him. And he hit Ian Jackson off the wing on the right side for a three-pointer that gave North Carolina the lead back. And that's the kind of example I'm thinking about. Like, if he's involved in the offense, he still makes smart plays. But if he's involved in the offense, it's just going to make things better for everybody. But I'll stop banging that same drum. I know folks are tired of hearing it. One of the things that I think was a little peculiar yesterday, and I want to make sure that we talk about this, I saw North Carolina doubling Ben Middlebrooks yesterday. And this is not for me to trash on Ben Middlebrooks. I think he has a very good skill set, and he did some nice things for NC State yesterday. And he's averaging, close to 12 a game, I believe. He's a very steady post player for them. Sherrell, I'd like to ask you, what are your thoughts on the strategy to double off on Ben Middlebrooks yesterday? Did that surprise you? Do you feel like that was a good choice? I just feel like I have to mention that because it just seemed so WTF to me when I saw it.
Well, I will say, I personally, y'all know how I feel about it. I don't like doubling off of guards ever in the way basketball is played now. Even with some of the huge post players who were in college basketball last year, like if Ryan Kalkbrenner, if Carolina was playing Creighton, I'd be like, don't help off of Kalkbrenner. Like just let him do his thing and see what happens, because the whole point of like basketball is to gain an advantage. And so if you double, then there's someone wide open no matter what. That's just my personal philosophy. It's probably too basic. I'm sure people will tell me I'm stupid, but what they were doing though, it seemed like it was Drake Powell who was doing a lot of the doubling, and that does change things a little bit because he's so athletic and has such a long wingspan and is such a smart and savvy defender. So it could be a situation where they felt more comfortable about Powell doing it just because of what we just mentioned than maybe someone else. Like if it was Cadeau or RJ Davis, I'd kind of be like, well, what are you doing and why are you doing it? But with Powell, he has the ability to get back to his man, on kind of a half help, as you would call it, Joey, or a soft double, more so than most people on the court. So that maybe made sense. But again, I think he played straight up and don't allow 3-point shooters to kind of get in the groove. To their credit, though, State's 3-point shooting wasn't great, so I'm sure that was part of the game plan too.
It was Hill, and that was really it for the most part. I think the
Taylor hit one.
Hit one. The Stanford transfer hit one. But you know what? I hadn't thought about that, Sherrell, and I can eat that. The fact of who they were doubling with might have been more of the importance in that situation rather than the double altogether. I could buy that. And I'm glad I asked you. Sean, do you feel better after this week about this team as they're constructed? Like, you always hear coaches say, winning cures everything, or Roy's old adage of it always looks better when the ball goes in the basket. But I'm going to ask you, Sean, do you feel better about this team's ability potentially to get into the NCAA tournament, maybe to steal one of their remaining Q1 games than you did 3 weeks ago?
Definitely better with the wins against Notre Dame and NC State. I think either one of those losses would have not have been a death sentence, but would have been tough. But I think in terms of the team, and you started to see, now with Trimble back, you started to see some of those lineups with the 4 guards, which I think will be interesting going forward. But also with Drake's emergence, you do have some lineups to play where if Cadeau turns the ball over twice, hey, let's switch it up, and you still have the other 3 guards plus Drake to pair with a big. Same thing, maybe if RJ's not shooting the ball well. So I do think between that as well as the narrowed lineups that you have kind of a squad that, hey, this is who we're gonna roll with for the remainder of the ACC for the most part. So once again, I think I do feel better, and once again with Ian Jackson's not emergence because he's been doing it for a while, but for his continued play, especially where he started slow, only had 5 points at the half, and then just really took over in the second half and hit big shots. You just need RJ to come along with him like he did against SMU. And once again, I think that, to me, is still the biggest question mark is what type of performance are you going to get from, really a guy who's going to be number 1 or number 2 in shot attempts. But winning helps. So three in a row, and really in the ACC the last few years, it's been not losing games you shouldn't lose. So I think that, unfortunately, is really the most important thing in this aspect, especially going into this week.
There was a Dagon Bot Scores on Twitter had a chart, and it basically said, I can't remember the exact number, but Hubert had tried over 100 different lineups in the first 15 or 16 games or something. You could see that he was tinkering, trying to figure out exactly what worked. And I think, Joey, to your point about shortening rotation, you're starting to see roles become pretty clearly defined on this team. And that was something that was missing, I think, for the first couple of months. It was kind of like, whose turn is it? Who gets the ball? Who on defense is going to kind of check the best perimeter defender? Who's going to check the best front court wing? All that minutia, all that stuff. It wasn't really clear. And I think now you kind of see it's like, okay, the best perimeter player oftentimes, Seth Trimble will get the assignment if he's starting or coming off the bench. Even though he's starting technically at the 4, Drake Powell usually will get the opposing team's best wing. Ian Jackson is kind of 1B, 1A with RJ Davis when it comes to scoring. Drake Powell's job is to cut and then try to hit open shots. So you're starting to see everybody get comfortable with what they're supposed to do, and I think it's probably a little clearer to them. So I think that is sustainable. As far as like feeling better, you feel better after the wins, but you can't ignore what you saw the previous 2.5 months, especially against much better teams. So
the foundation
is
still what it is.
Yeah, the foundation is still what it is, but you can mitigate those things, and that's what we've talked about for the last few months. Like, how does Hubert Davis and his staff start to mitigate things? And I think you're seeing the shortened rotation, the clearly defined roles, multiple guards on the court at the same time, Ian Jackson getting as many plays called for him as RJ Davis, Cadeau trying to really go back to being mainly a distributor, Drake Powell being open shot versatility guy, Jalen Washington set screens, hit the occasional jump shot, hit the boards, Vidal Lubin hit the boards. Like, everybody knows what they're supposed to do. So a long-winded way of saying, yes, feel better, but there's still a lot of improvement that needs to happen. But the good thing about this team, as opposed to some of the teams in the past, is that they actually have the capacity, I think, to improve, just because Drake Powell has such a high ceiling, Ian Jackson has such a high ceiling. This is the most Jalen Washington's ever played basketball his entire life. So you would expect the more you play, the better you'll get. RJ Davis still hasn't he's played well, don't get me wrong, but he hasn't shot like we expect RJ Davis to. And Elliot Cadeau can still improve too. So their foundation is the same, but they still have a lot of room for growth.
I think one other thing for me was the 3-point shooting. I think have been very concerned about their offensive ability and ability to score for a while. I think that's currently showing out in the ACC only stats, which at least got a little better. But SMU 11-22, so they went over the magical 8 number. NC State only 7 threes, so just under. But a lot of that was done in the second half from Ian Jackson, shot 36%. So once again, I think that is going to be an area to continue to look for, because if they are struggling to score, especially like they did in the first half, I think when you're looking at the points per possession, it was under 0.79, which is horrendous. The 3-point can solve a lot of issues. So to me, is that something that can be sustainable from a percentage and quantity perspective going forward?
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for that. And Sherrell made a good point too, that the talent level at a couple of positions for North Carolina may make this delta, this improvement that they have the ability to make over the next few weeks, much more likely, and it might actually make things, I guess, it might even make them microwavable. And I say that because of looking who's on the schedule the next couple of days. Go ahead, Sherrell.
And I'll say the goal is to get in the NCAA tournament and win games in the NCAA tournament. Like, I don't think it's going to be a situation where they win 14 straight or anything like that to close the regular season. Or there's 15 games left in the regular season. I don't foresee them going 15-0 or anything crazy. But if they can make the tournament, not to be cliche, but they always talk about styles make fights. And it's like, all it takes is a couple of good matchups in the tournament, and off you go, and that confidence. So the goal now is just to get in there and give yourself a chance. And that's where, Joe, you're talking about the delta, if you will, of what this team can be is really, I think, is with Drake Powell and with Ian Jackson. Now, Ian, I don't know how much better he can get offensively than what he's playing now, but there's still a way to go for Drake. And couple all that together, and they have a shot. I mean, I'm surprised that they've lost 6 games at this point, but their talent level is there where they could easily go on a run. Do I think it'll happen? I just don't know. But they do have a talent level to base that on that they haven't in past years.
Well, and I will go back to the way things felt just a couple of weeks ago, even after the Louisville game. I kind of wrote the season off, and I still think this team's ceiling is pretty finite. But I do think there feels like more optimism around playing the games, especially when you have a guy that is a trademark certified bucket like Ian Jackson on your squad. And I'm thinking it might be a really good idea for Johnny T-Shirt to buy and sell some 5-gallon buckets just with like Ian Jackson's number and name on them. Think about it. Like that's marketing, guys. And if anybody is going to come up with something like that for the Tar Heel fan in your life, it's going to be Johnny T-shirt. Johnny T-shirt right there on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. 2 home games this week, Cal and Stanford, which means 2 chances for you to go to Johnny T-shirt and pick up some wares. Who knows? If you're in there, ask them, say, hey, you guys going to get some certified buckets for Ian Jackson? And see what happens. I wonder if they. I wonder if it might be something they consider. Nothing else. Maybe I'll run down to Lowe's or maybe order some off of Temu, and maybe I'll see if I can make some money for the kid through NIL selling some certified buckets. But either way, if they don't have certified buckets, they've got everything else you need. And we love Johnny T-shirt. We love the support they give to all of IC's content. We hope you'll show them the same love when you're getting gear the next time you're up for it. Right there at johnnytshirt.com. For those of you who are watching this on video, later on there will be just me and Sean and Sherrell coming right back. But the audio version is going to drop some national ads in here. Just hang tight. We'll be right back with more of the Coast to Coast podcast. Shout out to almost the 250 folks that have been in the chat with us so far live tonight as we're recording this on a Sunday evening. Coast to Coast podcast. I'm Joey Powell. Sherrell, McMillan, Sean Moran are here. We are your favorite podcast. Guys, I know we've talked about Ian Jackson. I talked about him before the break. I don't know what else, to parrot Sherrell a second ago, I don't know what else he can do because he has absolutely shown that he's got an amazing quick release. He's not afraid to pull the trigger. He's not afraid to take a big shot when there's pressure on him. Oh, and by the way, if you come out on him, he can absolutely get to the rack and contort his body and control the ball and find a way to score in that way too. I don't know what else is in the young man's bag, but I am absolutely giddy at the opportunity to see it. Sean, do you feel like there's anything left for him to reveal to anybody?
I think he's revealed a lot. I think the shame is that we're only going to get to watch it for 2 more months, hopefully as long as possible. But we've been talking about him for close to, or probably over 2 years, and I think it was a little bit of a slow start. But I mean, you saw in Kansas where everybody was struggling and he wasn't afraid of the moment, and you've continued to see the consistency. I think coming in, everybody knew he could get a basket, but the efficiency and 3-point effectiveness, I think, was a question mark. And he's been lights out. I mean, even yesterday, I think when we struggled early on, missing some shots, turnovers, you start to think, it's on the road. The quote about what he had midweek, maybe it's a little too much, and then he gets 5 points at the end, and then just is lights out in the second half once again with some of those big shots, especially giving UNC the lead back. I think he's, once again, from the outside shooting, the ability to take the ball one-on-one, just that. And to me, it goes back to that Memphis game, the exhibition where he came off the bench, he struggled. It was a turnover on the right side where he caught it out of bounds. But that's kind of a play I have in my mind of just that explosion off that first step. And I think he continues to show that in addition to the explosiveness off of 1 foot when he gets in the lane. So I think for me, it's been fun watching him. I probably want him to shoot it a little bit more. And once again, hoping that it could be kind of a Batman Robin with him and RJ. Just need RJ to kind of pull himself up. But I think it's clearly becoming Ian's team from an offensive standpoint. And I think in terms of what Hubert has tried to style this NBA offense, he is that type of NBA player with the size and athleticism to get a shot anytime he wants. So, I've been very high on him, but he continues to outdo my expectations as well. So it's fun watching him, and hopefully it can go on for as long as possible.
Sherrell, anything else that you may have seen on the recruiting trail from Captain Jack that Tar Heel fans haven't seen yet? Because I feel like we've probably got a poster coming too, but his game has just been so fun to see.
No, if coming into the season, I would have said, well, if he can just shoot better at this point of the year, then he'll be ridiculous. And he's shooting 42% from 3. I mean, offensively, I'm really not sure. You just want him to be consistent because I'm not sure if he can get any better because, to Sean's point, he's just so efficient, finishes so well in transition. Sometimes you're like, don't go 1-on-3, and he just somehow kind of does a matrix thing where he squeezes between everybody and gets to the rim. The next step is, him getting the respect to get foul calls on some of those. There were a couple of plays on Tuesday and on Saturday where he got to the rim, made the layup, but he got pushed or got hacked and just didn't get the foul call. So that's the next step. But if he can continue shooting like this, the stat is he's got 32 makes on the year. I think the stat is that there's only been 2 freshmen who made 53 points in a year that shot 40% in Carolina history, and that's Kerwin Walton and Rashad McCants. And right now, Ian Jackson is right there at 42%. So offensively, I don't think he can really get any better. You just hope he can sustain what he's doing now, and I think he can. Again, this kid, it's funny how narratives work, man, because he got kind of forgotten about because he was so good so early. And everybody was like, oh, he's got to improve this. And we nitpicked his game for 3.5 years because he was so good so early.
When he hovered around that 10 to 15 era in the rankings too, and everybody was like, all right, we've seen him. What else is he going to do?
Right. And so even coming into the season, it was like, well, maybe if he can, just score a little bit and just, show flashes, then, that'll be great for Carolina, and then he can go into the NBA. And it's like, no, this dude has scored maybe not efficiently. This dude has scored in bunches at every single possible level, from middle school to high school to AAU to international play and now in college. This is what he does. So it shouldn't be super surprising, especially to people who follow recruiting, who listen to us, who listen to people like Eric Bossi, what Jackson is doing. And it couldn't have come at a better time for Carolina because they really needed, once Seth Trimble went down, they needed somebody to step up, and he's done that just almost surprisingly, to the point where you're not expecting 6 20-point games already, but not quite surprising because this is what he does.
His creativity, I think, is probably something that I did not expect. And I saw a decent amount of his high school highlights, but his creativity and ability to get a shot regardless of what's going on around him, like that doggedness of, all right, it's going up. It's just a matter of how am I going to get it up. And this isn't me trying to rip on Caleb Love, but Caleb kind of had this thing of like, all right, it's in my hands. I'm going to get a shot off. I don't know that Jackson thinks that long. Like, I just feel like he's already got in his mind that it's going up, but I think he's taking that extra step of how it's going up, which is the reason he's probably scoring at a higher clip with more regularity than Caleb Love was at that time. A couple of things we want to mention before we take a couple questions from our live audience in the chat tonight, and shout out to everybody who's joining us live. If you are not joining us live and you're hearing us later on, that's great. If you ever want to join us live, we try to post on Sundays what we're going to do, if we're going to be able to do it live, working with everybody's schedules, but we'll post that on the premium message boards on Sundays. So if you ever want to be a part of the squad that joins us when we do the live show, feel free. Zayden High's name came up this past week. He is actually back in school at UNC, still not a part of the North Carolina basketball team, but he is back in school. Adam Smith has a write-up about that on Inside Carolina, so go look for that if you have not seen it yet. But that does give you a little bit of insight as to where things stand with him and just kind of gives you some clarity about what's going on with regard to Zayden High and the University of North Carolina. The last thing I'll ask before we take some questions, Sherrell, we mentioned Caleb Wilson last week. We mentioned Travis Branham last week. We talked about, hey, Travis seems to be out in front of this thing. Lo and behold, Travis kind of gave everybody some info this past week and posted that on IC Premium. Seemed to echo what Sherrell's been saying. Sherrell, anything else you want to add about that?
Nah, Travis knows what he's doing. Like we said last week, Travis knows what he's doing. No, it's Carolina's right there with Kentucky. I think that's been the conventional wisdom for a couple of months now. I think people assumed Kentucky was out in front, and he could still end up at Kentucky, but Carolina's in there, and I think he said January. We expect January, so there are 19 days left in January, or almost 18 days left in January. So we should know something here in the next couple of weeks, and I think if UNC were to get him, it'd be a really massive win for Hubert Davis. If he opts to go to Kentucky, then Carolina will have struck out with the hybrid forwards in the class of 2025 that they've offered going back almost 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. And so they would likely look to obviously the portal, but then high school decommitments as well, and guys who get out of their letters of intent. So there's a big market for players still that you can find in the spring, but they would prefer to get Wilson because he's such a I don't want to say similar to Drake Powell as far as a player is concerned, but just as like a person, and then as far as like just oozing potential every time you watch him play. Like I was talking, I was talking to someone pretty close to Drake Powell. And I was like, man, every time he like does something on the court, you can just see the potential like dripping off of him because it's there, and it's just a matter of just more playing time. And Caleb Wilson's the same way. He's just got a lot of potential, a lot of skill. It can be a really good defensive player too at the next level. So we'll see what happens. Again, it would be a major win for UNC were it to happen. If it doesn't happen, it would be disappointing for Hubert Davis and his staff, but they would keep moving and head to the portal.
Yeah, for sure. So let's look forward to this coming week. I mentioned UNC has 2 home games. Again, there's nothing ever bad about having some home cooking, but I meant to mention this earlier. The North Carolina's 2 out of their last 3 wins came down to getting a stop on the last possession when the opponent had the ball trying to win the game. I don't think we need to discuss that, but I think it's important to mention that. I think that just, that may turn into be a thing, especially considering how bad North Carolina's defense has been at times. Just wanted to throw that out there. Let's look forward to the 2 games this week. Cal, just kind of an overview. They've yet to win a road game this season. They're 8-8 on the year. They have a 109.6 defensive rating on KenPom, and I think they're like 130-ish on KenPom's rankings. And then Stanford is who North Carolina hosts on Saturday. A little bit better record. They're 11-5. The top 2 scores in the ACC, guys, you know which teams they play for? They play for Stanford. They play for Cal. The first one's Maxime Reynaud, who North Carolina fans wanted to transfer in last year. You may recognize him, the big man from Stanford that I guess he dipped his pinky toe into the portal waters for just long enough to make a ripple, then decided to stay at Stanford. The other one is Peja Stojakovic's kid, Andre, who is at Cal, scoring 20 points a game. Both of these guys averaging a little bit or around 20 points a game. They're the top 2 scorers in the ACC. That's who North Carolina's going to see this week. Ironically, both teams are allowing about 77 points, or I'm sorry, both teams are scoring on average about 77 points a game. I'll ask you guys, what do you think North Carolina's giving up on average on defense?
Per game in the ACC or this season?
Just what is North Carolina giving up per game, points-wise, in the season, not just ACC?
76.
77. That's why I brought it up. It's both of these teams are averaging 77 points a game. North Carolina is giving up 77 points a game. I do think that they will be able to. I do think North Carolina will be favored in both of these. Sean, any premonitions about what we may see from North Carolina schematically against Cal and Stanford?
I think the one thing that stands out on an offensive end from both of these teams is that they have played better in ACC play. Once again, I know it's early, but you look at Stanford, they're shooting close to 38% from 3, and they do have a difference maker with size. So I think the Stanford game is probably going to be closer than what the line is looking like. And then Cal, they were getting destroyed by Virginia Tech at home early on, and then they had a strong second half, and we have seen individual players have been able to take over for certain teams. But once again, I think that's why I thought last week was so important of getting that home win against SMU, getting that road win against NC State, and then you have 2 home games, people coming from across the country. And once again, I think this is a UNC team that should not look past anybody, but these ideally are teams you should get 2 wins going into Wake Forest in. But I do think the Stanford game definitely will present some problems. I think they have a really strong coach, and they're starting to play together. Both teams have a little bit of size. So once again, from a style, they're not run and gun, things of that nature. But I do think from an offensive perspective and especially 3-point shooting from a Stanford side are things to watch out for.
Sherrell, anything else you want to add about these 2 teams coming into Chapel Hill this week?
Yeah, I've watched, unfortunately, Cal several times, and
I'm not going to ask why, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, you know why. You got to chase when you're down. You got to chase, especially on the West Coast. 11:30 p.m. You're down 25 and you got to chase. No, but they struggle. Sean said they're playing better, but the times I watched them, they really struggled to shoot. And it seems like that wouldn't be the case considering Stojakovic is one of the leading scorers in the ACC. Both guys were at Stanford, by the way, last year. So that's funny to me. He went to
That's
Cal.
a weird transfer, but yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of like Dontrez Styles going to NC State, but at least he took a gap year and went to Georgetown in between.
He went and purged in DC for a little bit, and then came back. Yeah, I got you.
Right, exactly. But for me, I this is the time of the year, even though it's a small sample size, I start to look at conference only stuff. And in the 5 ACC games they played, I mean, Cal has been horrendous defensively. I mean, not even bad, horrendous. They're last in efficiency. They're last in effective field goal percentage. They're last in three-point percentage. And then on the other side, offensively, they're last in effective field goal percentage. And so everybody's like, oh, well, they're a great offensive rebounding team. Yeah, because they miss a ton of shots.
Because they miss half the shots they
take,
yeah.
So honestly, to me, this Cal game, Sean's talked about it, how Carolina's offense has not been great. It feels like a get-right game for the UNC offense. Now, that's probably famous last words, and everyone's going to hate me for saying that, but this should be a game where UNC can get up and down the court because when you have a team that – here we go. This is my cycle portion of the program. When you have a team that struggles to shoot, if you can control the defensive rebounds and get in transition, you can score a ton of points. So I look for R.J. Davis to have a big game, and I think they should put up 80, 85, 90 points against a team like this. Again, I'm not trying to jinx anything. I'm just looking at the numbers and going by the eye test, but that game should be a get-right game. But to Sean's point, Stanford is completely different because Stanford has the size, not just at center, but at power forward and backup center to mitigate some of the things that UNC does well. So I don't feel nearly as bullish on Carolina just kind of, taking Stanford to the woodshed as I do Cal.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty good layout for anybody who's just wanting a quick scouting report on both these teams. North Carolina should be favored. If North Carolina plays well, North Carolina should win. But like Sherrell said, famous last words, right? Like I don't think this team has gotten to a place where they can look past anybody or take anything that they do under their own volition for granted. Like we've learned this. You take that at your own peril. Guys, before we go ahead, Sean.
I just said
this is West Coast stuff. This is right up your alley. Go ahead.
Yeah. As with the transfer portal starting to get familiar with players popping up all over the place, but with Cal, Matty Sasako, who played at Michigan State, so kind of one of the lumbering bigs that they had, and then for Stanford, Jalen Blakes from Duke, who's been pretty aggressive getting to the line. So just a few names that have popped up on the UNC radar in the past years.
Awesome. I'm glad you got to mention Matty Sissoko since Sherrell had done some pregame research on them. Guys, before we get to our 2 cents, let's take a couple of quick questions from the folks in the audience. I want to make sure that we do so. And B-Mick, you asked about Cal's record against the spread. I think there's something like 8-6-1 right now. So B-Mick dropped that in the chat. So I want to make sure I get that. All right, some good questions from the folks that are with us live. Sherrell, I'm going to give this one to you first. Do you think Seth will be able to score double figures coming off the bench? How is his morale right now? Thanks. He'll hang up and listen. Shout out to using the old sports talk radio terminology. Big fan of that. Wesley Carson. Sherrell, if you would like to handle that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, rack that guy. So I think Trimble, his whole thing, his entire career has really come down to confidence. The physical skills I don't think have really been in question. It's just you can plainly see when Trimble is playing with confidence, and you can plainly see when he's not. You look at the first month of the season, really the first 2 months of the season through UCLA, you could tell even when his shot wasn't going in against UCLA, he was driving to the rim, he was aggressive, he was looking for his shot, but not overly looking for his shot. So I think if he can just kind of accept that I don't want to say lost his starting role, but when he got hurt and Ian Jackson is kind of taken over, so it's going to be hard to take Ian Jackson out of the lineup. It's going to be hard to take Joey Powell out. So if he can re-embrace his role as a sixth man and kind of get that confidence back, yeah, he can score 10 points a game. I don't think you're going to get a ton more from the bench considering that it's shortened to about 7 players. But I think Trimble can give you that just from getting to the foul line and getting out in transition. And he's very important too, just because he's a very able rebounder from the wing too.
Thank you, sir. Sean, I'll let you take this one from our guy, Rob M. Our guy, you know he's a good person because I gave him the Corey Alexander treatment. Do you think that Washington's improvements are the last missing piece to raise UNC's ceiling, or is it outside shooting, or what? Sean Moran, you're on the clock. Go.
I think it is a piece to raise the ceiling. Sherrell mentioned you might not be seeing double-doubles from him, but once again, I think if you can get consistent play from both him and Van Allen Lubin, once again, from an efficiency standpoint, Lubin has been playing, doing pretty well. So I think if you can get Washington, once again, with 8 to 10 points would be amazing. And if some of those are just catch and dunks because he's wide open, or you're getting 4 points from face-ups, I think that, once again, relieves the stress that needs to come from the guards scoring all their points. And from a defensive end, if you can just present a semblance of rim protection, which he has done very well the last 3 games, that in turn helps the defense, where if somebody gets beat or pick and roll, it's not just going to be a layup line to the basket. So I definitely think it is a piece, but would say there may be some other bigger pieces in terms of the overall ceiling for UNC this season.
Thank you, sir. Next question from M. Barnes. I'm not going to put this on the screen or spend a lot of time on it, but he calls out, did they change the rule on the sideline inbounds play because Dontrez Styles traveled yesterday? Yes, absolutely. He took like 9 steps. That should have been a call, but we won't get into officiating because I don't want to get fined by the league. And then the last question, I'm going to throw this to you, Sherrell, from Bart Watts in the chat. When will legitimate portal back channeling begin? Those are amazing words strung together, right? Legitimate portal back channeling. Sherrell.
I'm just here so I won't get fined.
Thank you, Marshawn.
No problem. No, legitimate back channeling doesn't end, is the answer to the question. I'm not trying to be deep or anything, but
what means what do they define as legitimate, I think, is the question.
It doesn't stop. It's agents are always talking to people at all times about their players, and that's the way it is now. So a guy could have signed in August, and in September his agent was probably just putting feelers out, checking in. Hey, how you doing? To school X or school Y. That's the environment we're in. There's no end to the back channeling. It's always going. Every good staff in America has a list of probably 50 to 100 players that they have good intel that's going to enter the portal, and that whether they're talking to the agent or they're talking to someone who knows the agent, they have a good idea of what he's looking for, the percentage chance that he's coming out, all those things. So I mean that's just kind of the world we live in now. You have to have a player development or like pro personnel in the NFL who watches other teams. You have to have a college personnel director who watches other teams and is kind of scouting the portal at all times.
Sorry about that. I dropped another question up on the screen that I didn't mean to. Just got happy fingers. All right, fellas, thank you all in the chat for the great questions. Before we get out of here, hit me up with some 2 cents. And while you are teeing up what your 2 pennies are going to be, make sure I give some love to our guys over at Congruity. Listen, Congruity can help you and your small business. It's real simple. You need a game plan for 2025, get in touch with Matt at congruityhr.com. It's a simple email. Reach out to Matt. Tell him you heard about him on the Coast to Coast because you listen to your favorite podcast. Matt knows. He'll say, hey, thanks for listening. Now, this is how we're going to help your business. What they're going to do, they call it an assessment. It's an audit, whatever term you want to use. They're going to look into how you operate in the backside of your business. They're going to go in and see, okay, where are they spending their time and energy and resources around human resources, benefits, payroll, all of that APO stuff. They're going to help you out with. They're going to show you, hey, we can save you money here. We can do this for this cost and save you X amount of dollars. It's that simple of a conversation. It's that simple of a transaction. There's no pressure. There's none of that, right? Matt's going to help you out. Congruity has become very well known. They have developed a national reputation because they do so well in these situations. You want somebody that comes up in the clutch? Congruity HR for your small and medium-sized business. Hit them up. Matt at congruityhr.com. All right, Sherrell. Give me 1 penny. Actually, you know what? You talked last. Sean, you can go next, sir. I'm trying to be equitable here. You give me 1 cent, part of our 2 cents, brought to you by Congruity HR.
Sure. So just talking about is Jalen Washington, is his improvement the missing piece. And while it's a piece, I'm going to go back to R.J. Davis and his play being the missing piece. I think we saw SMU and what UNC can look like, where both Ian and RJ are humming at the same time, and then you add Drake Powell and his shooting, but then you have NC State 11 points. For the most part didn't force it, but at the same time in the second half late had a wide open three, no pass possession. Also some of the pull up jumpers you expect him to hit, and at the same that's going to be I think where it goes. I think at the beginning of the year the question was, could Ian be that number two that could support RJ? But now I think it's really reversed. Once again, is there injuries? Are there other issues? Perhaps, but I think we need a consistent effort from RJ right now. I feel it's 2 years ago where Caleb Love's taking shots and you hope it's going to go in because you remember that UCLA performance, but then it doesn't, and you see a poor shooting performance. And right now, feels like that way with RJ, where you remember everything he's done over the years, but the results have been the same. So if he can raise just his efficiency and his, I think, overall offensive play, that will be what determines, is UNC a tournament team that can make just a little bit of a run, or are they going to be on the bubble / looking for the NIT? So that's still the biggest missing piece of the puzzle for me.
Fair. We'll allow it. All right, Sherrell. Now it's your turn. Now the spotlight is on you, sir. No pressure. Bring it.
No, so following up on R.J. Davis, we talked about him as a distributor. 7 of the last 10 games, he's had 4 or more assists, and then he's had 4 or more assists in 5 consecutive games. So to me, that shows that the ball is starting to move a little more. It was sticking there for various times, I think, in December, and some of the losses. I think part of the reason was the ball wasn't moving. So when UNC, it sounds simple, but when they pass the ball and make the defense move, there was one possession against State that was just so beautiful.
4 passes. I know where you're talking.
Trimble drives baseline to, I believe, Ian Jackson, or to Drake Powell, who swings it to Ian Jackson, who swings it to R.J. Davis, who makes a move and hits a 3. Like, that's the way you have to play when you're playing 4 guards. So I think that's important. And then 2, again, I keep coming back to this because this is the second straight, well, really third straight year that has happened, where UNC looks awful defensively in the non-conference and really up to that CBS Sports Classic. And then something happens that weekend. They go home for Christmas. They come back and they magically can, play competent defense. Part of it, there are several reasons, I know. Part of it is, worse competition, obviously. Part of it is they've got to gel. Part of it is it's a small sample size, even though we're a fourth of the way through the ACC schedule. But in the end, the results, this happens almost every year under Hubert Davis, where you get into mid-January and you look and you see under conference only, defensive efficiency, North Carolina number 2 behind Duke. You look at three-point defense, North Carolina number 1. You look at effective field goal percentage defense, North Carolina number 1. And it's kind of like, how does this happen every year? I don't quite understand it, because I don't think they've really ever under Hubert Davis had the personnel to be, maybe his first year, to be like a lockdown defensive team. But every year, they trend better into January on the defensive side. So as much as we gave them heck, so to speak, for how bad the defense was, I think we have to praise them because they played really, really solid defense in the aggregate. There have been halves, like the second half against State. I think State shot 60%. But overall, the defense is much improved. It's still not where it needs to be, but it is much improved.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the difference. I don't mind being the old man shouting at clouds and saying there are, lies, damn lies, and statistics, and that's one that I said last year at this time when you were starting to dig up this stat. I'll be the idiot that doesn't fall in line, but I think your point is a salient one, Sherrell, and one that will actually be worth tracking over the next little bit. All right, y'all. Before we go, shout out to Roger Calloway, who says he's enjoying the show from Alaska, and to Aaron H., who says he's enjoying the show in the Philippines. So I guess we're like the coast to coast to others side of planet now. We got to rename the show. Either way, wherever you're listening from, we appreciate you being a part of the show. Shout out to Sherrell, to Sean for bringing the heat every week, to John Siegley for producing, to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity for sponsoring this here show. I am just Joey Powell. We will talk to all of you very, very soon on the next episode of the Coast to Coast podcast. for InsideCarolina.com.